I know I'm a bit late to the game when it comes to playing FF7 Remake, but hear me out. Because of how much I loved the original FF7, I was a little nervous to play the remake, and I made the mistake of accidentally watching some YouTube videos just ripping the game to shreds. It was sort of addicting. There was this whole trend on YouTube of picking FF7 Remake apart piece by piece and stepping on it and then lighting it on fire. It became a sort of genre. Well, I fell into the deep hole that was FF7 Remake hate videos, and I became convinced that FF7 Remake was absolutely the stinkiest, most radioactive piece of garbage to ever come out of a Shinra reactor. For the last few years, I decided not to play it, until recently, when a video of mine about the original FF7 attracted a lot of comments about the remake, and I got to see how many people out there really loved it. It got me thinking, was I wrong? First, I'll be talking about 3 things I didn't like, and then, to end the video on a positive note, 3 things I did like. But first, the negatives. Negative number 1, filler content. There are 3 kinds of filler content in FF7 Remake. Side objectives between story moments, new story moments that aren't exactly necessary, like visiting Jesse's parents, and old story moments that are stretched out way longer than needed. Thankfully, a lot of filler content is skippable, but not all of it. Some of the filler is that aspects of the original story have been stretched out like rubber. I'm looking at you, Crawlspace. Just a little farther. As for the side quests, I opted to skip most of them, and I think my game experience was better for it. I did a couple, but as soon as people started asking me to find their lost children, I was like, no thanks. The few side quests I did complete were mainly to help me fill out my assess materia so that I could unlock new VR summon battles. So the side quests didn't bother me because I can understand why they were there, and I'm glad that they are skippable. There are certain kinds of gamers who are just going to want to spend as much time in this world as possible, and I get that. It's a beautiful world, and extremely nostalgic for some of us. At times, I also enjoyed slowing down and taking it all in. So the side quests are there for people like that, and that's cool. You know, some people like a bit of fat in their steak. My problem was the filler content that you couldn't skip. It almost felt like the developers weren't confident enough in the product they were delivering and made certain story arcs more convoluted than they needed to be. For instance, the sewers. At first you think, okay, a little long, but fine. But then, not long after, back into the sewers you go. And you even fight the same boss as before. And don't get me started on those sewer piggies. Whosever idea this was deserves to be shot into space immediately. Likewise with the train graveyard, which was the lowest of the low for me. But the train graveyard itself as an area was also the least inspired, being just a very bare bones facility in solid blue ambient lighting. And the puzzle navigation in this place just amounts to unlocking a door or turning on a generator. By this point, it just felt like, okay, we've been there and done that already. It made me think how inspired the art direction of the original was, because seeing some of those areas faithfully recreated here was striking. Anytime the game lifted something directly from the original, it was great. I think when I was playing, I was turning on some selective memory, pushing out all the things I didn't like and focusing on the things I did like. Anyway, negative number 2, Sephiroth and Aerith. The biggest problem with that is that they don't feel like the same characters anymore. They feel like they're Kingdom Hearts versions, or even worse, like fan fictions. Sephiroth is little more than a droning robot in this game, meandering around in the shadows, speaking in non sequiturs. It didn't add to the mystery of his character. I agree with other reviewers here that he's revealed far too early and too much in this game, and each appearance is handled poorly. But what's the problem I have with Aerith? Well, she just seemed childish. I didn't buy that she was this tough girl from the slums, harassed by Shinra, that ex-girlfriend of a battle-hardened soldier. Something about her always seemed forced, constrained. To be fair, Aerith isn't in too much of the game. She's largely missing for the beginning and a vast majority of the middle, so I'm hoping that she'll be handled much better in Rebirth. I understand that it's going to be difficult to please everyone, and that's just my own personal feeling about them. Negative number 3, the story. The story is mostly great until it's not. It gets legitimately wild at the end, but it's not just the bonkers conclusion that's a problem. Interspersed throughout the game are these fourth wall breaking moments when FF7 Remake seems to become self-aware of itself as a narrative, using big words like destiny with a capital D. If there's something the original definitely could have used in a remake, it was coherency. Not being complex enough was probably the last thing anybody could have said about the original FF7. If some of you watching this like writing, then you'll know what I mean by this. This game kind of felt like when you were a little kid and you get this great idea and you start feverishly writing it down, thinking this is going to be the next Harry Potter, but you're so excited for the reader to know how great your story is that you end up telling all of it in the first chapter. That's kind of what FF7 Remake does. The game knows it's not telling the whole story, but the developers are so excited to get everything in there that they just can't help themselves. They want you to know how awesome it's going to be. It goes beyond foreshadowing. What FF7 Remake does is more like forebrightening. The game would have seriously benefited from some heavy editing. It probably could have been a really fantastic 30-hour or so game. But a diamond in the rough is still a diamond, and FF7 Remake nevertheless sparkles in a certain light at certain times. Enough with the negatives, let's look at some positives. Positive number 1, incredible battle system. Square Enix has been experimenting with action combat for a while. I think the first mainline entry to have it was FF15 and then FF16, but neither of them got action combat right like FF7 Remake does. Not only is FF7 Remake action-oriented, but it preserves elements of turn-based strategy by freezing time so that you can select abilities, spells, or items. Because of this, we also have full party control, which, controversially, is not something FF16 had, in which you controlled only one character for the entire game. The battle system here is always a pleasure, and the boss fights are legitimately challenging. I love that you have to exploit enemy weaknesses to get an advantage, and although the magic is extremely powerful, you can't abuse it to cheat the system. It's really a wonderful blend of the thrill of action-based combat and the analytical satisfaction of turn-based combat. By the way, the boss fights in this game are epic. I love that they didn't just throw an enemy at you with high HP and high strength. You have to look at the unique characteristics of each boss, react to their evolving moveset, and find vulnerabilities to take advantage of when possible. The battle system is one of the best things about this game, and it may be worth playing for that reason alone. Positive number 2, immersive storytelling. One of my big pet peeves in gaming, especially JRPGs, is start and stop storytelling, which usually looks like this. Hero wakes up, steps forward, cutscene starts. When the cutscene ends, hero leaves the room, and then another cutscene. Somehow, amazingly, FF7 Remake is not like that. Despite being a narrative-heavy game, like all Final Fantasies, it's found a way to make the storytelling less obtrusive than it could have been. There are cutscenes, but the game makes sparing use of them. Usually, if it has some information to convey, they'll just say that information while the player is walking and looking around. Maintaining the stage of gameplay during narrative moments can be really interesting and interactive. Otherwise, we start to get impatient, just sitting there holding the controller, waiting to jump on something and shoot stuff. Maybe we can call it controller itch. Anyway, FF7 Remake tells its story fluidly, without getting in its own way. Other games would have had everyone stop and made you listen to them talking until it was over. Sometimes in FF7 Remake, this results in the player being forcibly slowed down for pacing reasons, which did annoy me, but for the most part, I really do appreciate that the game keeps the player in control as much as possible. Now for the final positive, the story. I know, the story was also negative number 3, but it's complicated. Everything, or almost everything, that's lifted directly from the source material is done extremely well. The best example for me is the scene with Elmira, when she explains her past about her husband. The game doesn't give us a whole chapter where we go meet Elmira's relatives, or we have to help her weed her garden. She's honestly done perfectly. She's not over-exaggerated, she's not made really quirky or anything, she's not wearing this strange outfit. She's just really human, and they told her story simply and beautifully. It's one of the highest of the highs in this game for me. Same thing for the opening mission and directly afterwards. The first bombing mission is handled with care and attention to detail. This is truly when FF7 Remake is of the highest caliber. What follows directly afterwards, when we see more of the middle class parts of the city, that's exactly the kind of expansion that FF7 needed. My overall feeling about FF7 Remake is that it's a great game that's mostly a lot of fun, though it lacks some of the original's masterful storytelling and artistic sophistication. In the end, however, the games left me more optimistic than not that this FF7 Remake series has potential. Of course, I don't love that the story appears to be different, or that it seems to be a weird sort of sequel that could only come out of the mind of Tetsuya Nomura, but it does appear to be those things. And I can either hate it for what it isn't, or enjoy it for what it is. Maybe Rebirth takes our criticisms and uses them to make the series into everything it could be.